The Leigh M2 multiple mortise and tenon attachment makes this once very tough joint surprisingly easy to make. The M2 attachment is a direct replacement for the original Leigh dovetail jig finger assembly. Once the M2 is assembled, you just slide it onto the arms and begin your setup for that joint. The M2 guide finger assembly looks very much like the dovetail setup, and it works the same way also. However, the M2 kit also includes this guide fence assembly. Leigh also includes one of their E-bushings as well as one of their high-speed steel half-inch upcut router bits. The scale blocks at either end of the guide finger assembly are also very much like the dovetail versions. They're clearly marked and easy to use. The guide fingers are adjusted on their bar the same way you do with the dovetail jig, including using the same driver. To make the whole process as easy as possible, Leigh includes one of their very well written and well made instruction manuals. The user guide walks you through setting this jig up for whatever mortise and tenon arrangement you want. I decided to start with a triple mortise and tenon because I could never do this without this jig. Leigh advises using a plunge router, and that's a good idea. They also suggest making the mortises in 2 or 3 passes to reduce the strain on the bit. It's a good idea to stop between passes and clean the debris out from the fingers. As it gets jammed in there, it will make the opening smaller. If you follow the directions and set your router up right, when you finish the last pass, you'll have cleanly cut mortises that have a nice edge on the top and bottom thanks to this quality bit. After cutting all of the mortises, you're ready to move on to cutting the tenons. All we do is flip the guide finger assembly over front to back and install the board for the tenons in the front of the jig. Because my layout leaves some pretty good sized gaps in between the fingers, we put this bridge material in. It's actually the bridge material that came with the D4 dovetail jig. After setting the bit depth for the kind of tenon I want, go ahead and route away all the material on this side of the jig. You can see that 3 of the tenon surfaces are nicely formed, but the back remains square. To remedy that, we flip the guide finger assembly over end, and then reinstall it on the arms and set it back to the original depth setting. And now we install the board on that side of the jig, flipping it over so the square edges are pointed out. As we move the router around the guide fingers this time, it not only cleans up the rest of the tenon, but it also cancels out some of the air that could be between the guide bushing and the bit. And now if you follow the directions, you should have a nice fitting multiple mortise and tenon joint. And this is the first multiple mortise and tenon joint that I cut on this jig. It might not be perfect, but I know that's me and not the jig. If you like the look of multiple mortise and tenons, you're going to want to get this jig. I can promise you that the Leigh M2 multiple mortise and tenon attachment and I are going to become very good friends.